Justice has many dimensions. One of these is representation. When justice is understood in terms of representation, this refers to the idea that all members of a society are on equal footing with each other. In a democratic society, this means the people. Therefore, representation is mostly considered in political terms. Are you and I equal in how we are represented in society? Whose interests matter more? Are our opinions equally valued? The principle of representation often plays out very differently in practice than it does in theory.
Underpinning this are two very different theories about how society can represent itself. One is the idea of republicanism. Here, the assumption is that democracies need a strong legal and political institution that protects citizens. The other is a theory of deliberative democracy, which posits that democracy should consist of people in a community deciding together for the common good. Often in societies we see a mix of two, that often there are voting mechanisms set up, but at the same time people raise their voice for what they believe is important or best for society.
There are several mechanisms in society which enable representation. On the one hand, this can be institutional. This means that there are mechanisms in place that allow people to be represented. In democracies, we know this as voting in elections, where citizens can vote for representatives to stand up for their interests. On the other hand, political representation can be through non-institutional means, for example, through different forms of activism or demonstrations. For some people, voting is not an option. For example, people who live in a society but are not citizens. There are therefore other somewhat non-traditional ways how someone can represent their interests. This can be through protests or demonstrations, which can help make issues visible that matter to people.
The idea of representation is strongly linked to that of recognition and redistribution. If your ideas are represented, are they also recognized? Do you have the same means that allow you to represent your interests as I do? Or is your starting position fundamentally different from that of others? It was a scientist called Nancy Fraser who famously pushed the idea that justice, when experienced in society, encompasses not only the distribution of resources, but also the issues of recognition and representation. And these issues intersect in different spheres, not only the political, but also the economic, the social, and the cultural spheres of society. So asking the question of representation allows us to talk about governance, fundamental human rights, institutional structures, and whose interests are dominant in a society.